So once again, welcome to everyone for joining this BCO Urban Affairs Group on global cities, positive changes since the COVID-19 pandemic. The clue's in the name, really. What we are going to be looking at today is COVID's impact on cities. This pandemic's been with us now for coming up to 2 years, and the way that cities and local and governments responded to the impact of the pandemic was fast and it was immediate out of necessities. So we're going to look at the effects that the pandemic has had on our urban environments, but also with a positive mind, look through to the innovations and the benefits that have occurred as a result of our reactions to the disease, and really ask ourselves, what are the lessons and the benefits that can be brought forward into the future, not just as a reactive measure, but as an improvement to the way we live in dense urban environments. We've got a fantastic panel of experts today who I'm going to introduce shortly. And I believe we've also got potentially a first for the BCO in terms of the international location of all of our panelists, which I'm very, very excited about. So joining us from London is Deborah Freeman-Watt, who is Head of Urban Opportunities at Landsec. Deborah was previously at Knight Frank and also Neo Capital in a number of senior roles. And Deborah's role is leading the acquisition and regeneration of major urban sites within the UK. From Torino in Italy is Andrea Cassi, who is a partner and a senior architect at Carloatti Associati. Now, Carloatti Associati and Andrea have experience collaborating with their Sensible City Lab at MIT in the United States, also looking at the role of digital technologies in the contemporary city. And then finally, joining us from Beijing is China, is Yosuke Hayano, who is an architect originally from Japan and a principal partner at MAD Architects. And something Yosuke is very passionate about is looking at contemporary interpretations of the Eastern affinity for nature within architecture and design. I'm your host. I'm actually joined today by Keith Priest, with whom I've collaborated in the inception of this event. Keith is a founder of Fletcher Priest Architects based in London. My name is Cristiano Testi. I'm a partner at TP Bennett, also based in London, but today joining you from the middle of the desert in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. So we have panelists in a number of different locations, which I think is a new record. The format for today, each panelist is going to give us a short interpretation of the exam question, so to speak. I will then facilitate a debate between the panelists, and then we invite everyone in the audience to put your questions forward to the panelists. At the top of the Zoom screen, you'll notice a Q&A button. Please make good use of it. Send the questions through, and they'll be fielded to the right expert on our panel, so we can hear from them directly. But now, without further ado, I would like to welcome Deborah to give us, Deborah, your contributions and your thoughts, please. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Hello, morning has gone now, it's afternoon, everyone. As it was explained, I'm head of urban opportunities at Landsec, which is basically Landsec's urban regeneration arm. I think probably the easiest thing to start out with would be to say that Landsec's vision, I guess, for modern urban living rests on 3 kind of key pillars: sustainable places, connecting communities, and realizing potential. We have recognized, and this was pre-pandemic as well, that a number of assets within our portfolio and probably across urban areas maybe are not really fit so much for kind of modern living, in particular some of the maybe slightly older and kind of dusty shopping centres. So we were already on this journey at looking to see how we might be able to reimagine and reposition these assets. Clearly, the pandemic has accelerated a blurring of lines, I suppose, between where people work and live and where they want to spend their leisure time. So in response to this at Landsec, with our mixed use developments, we see that a clear sense of place is becoming increasingly important. And that really feeds through to the growth of our strategy, I guess, in creating new urban neighbourhoods through a series of living-led development projects in major cities. a really important bit of this is placemaking. It's a term that's used a lot at the moment, but I think what we're trying to focus in on in our projects in different cities across the UK is realizing that these locations have place and have community, and it's really about taking all the best bits of that and building on that and building on the relationships that we've had and worked through over the years. I mean, maybe if I could go on to the next slide, which I'm hoping is the one, sorry, it's in a slightly wrong order. Could we go on to the next one and come back to this one? So this just is a sort of visual example, I guess, of kind of what I'm talking about. These are 3 major projects that Landsec is involved in at the moment, and is kind of, I suppose, leading the way in how we're thinking about post-pandemic living, and how health and well-being and the environment are very much sort of upfront and key to these. Across London at the moment, we have, I think, somewhere in the region of 50 plus so acres of urban redevelopment sites that we are in the process of master planning, putting in planning applications. And we also, you may have seen in the news, recently made a large acquisition in Manchester, Media City. This is something that was established over the last 10 years, probably one of the earlier models of sort of mixed use regeneration development. A large chunk of it, as you are probably all aware, is fairly stabilized and has become one of the leading European media hubs. But what interested us as well was to sort of build that regeneration of the Salford area and look at the potential of, I think it's close to an extra £500 million of investment to further develop and kind of bring it into the next 10 years and so forth. If I flip back to the middle slide, again, you know, core to our values that we're talking about, health and well-being, but environment, and obviously following sort of hard after COP26, Landsec announced its revitalized, I suppose, strategy for to meet our targets for net carbon zero in 2030. And I guess the high level number is that we have now a fully costed out plan of about 135 million that will take us on that path. You know, there's some quite big headline figures there, but I think the takeaway from this is that every project that we look at right up front, day one, the framework for how we are going to deliver this in a sustainable way is set out. And I've been working in international property investment for over 25 years. You know, this used to probably not feature on a list or be a little maybe nice to have at the bottom of the list. And I'm very much encouraged at a company like Landsec and across the other major developers now that it's front and foremost in the thinking when we start to go on our master planning. So that's probably enough about Landsec and our projects. But I just hope that gave everyone a bit of an insight into our thinking here.
Thank you very much, Deborah. That's really useful to hear from you. Andrea, could I hand over to you to talk us through your views on the topic, please? Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Cristiano and BCO, for your invitation. Maybe I will switch off the camera only for the connectivity, well, to make the connection stable. Then I will switch on again. Well, if we can go to the next, thank you. Well, what I'm trying to do today is to go through some trends linked to the pandemic that we have identified in our works during the last 2 years. Being a designer and an architect, I'm going to do it showing you a couple of projects and examples. And well, let's start from one of the main questions linked to the pandemic. Are cities over? This question that comes back periodically, especially during such a disruptive event as the pandemic. If we can go to the next, is also from a certain point of view, well, the starting point of our research at CRA and Carlo Ratti's research at Sensible City Lab at MIT as Cristiano mentioned. Just a quick introduction. Our work as a design and innovation practice is very much to study the impact of digital technologies at the urban and the architectural scale. And at the beginning of the digital revolution, one of the main thinking was the death of the cities as a consequence, as a leftover of the industrial era. And if you can go to the next, as you know, the opposite has happened. The digital revolution has grown in parallel to the largest expansion ever of urban areas all around the world. Well, if you can go to the next, that's why we're saying that instead of killing cities, the digital define a new layer superposed to the physical one, augmenting it in a certain way. Well, why I'm referring to the so-called digital revolution and to the ICT today? Next slide, thanks. Well, because in the last 2 years, we were able to attend to a sort of acceleration of certain processes that were already in progress. And we can say that the pandemic in some cases has accelerated the pace of urban innovation, compressing what would have taken years into months or even weeks. This is the example, if you can go to the next, of Paris. You know, during the pandemic, something interesting happened in Paris. Is the example of the so-called Corona piste. In English is the coronavirus bike lanes. Well, with Paris traffic subdued by the lockdown, the mayor decided to close Rue de Rivoli, one of the central road, a nearly 2-mile long road, to cars in order to create more space for pedestrians and bicyclists. Well, examples of this one are showing that the needs of people in a city are changing fast. And if we can go to the next, we can see one of the most discussed changes linked to the pandemic that relates to the separation of home and work. In this regard, we can see that two main things are changing fast. First of all, the urban geography going in the direction of an overlapping function instead of the development of one-dimensional business district, for example. And if we can go to the next, we can see the way, well, how it's changing the way in which we work. Next one, thanks. In the past 2 decades, we already saw a big transformation that now is even more evident. The pandemic, next one, thanks, is leading several companies to revise their models and their spaces. It's what we're doing, for example, with Banca Sella, a bank here in Italy. And the main question in this kind of revision, this kind of, well, rethinking of their models, actually is why do we still need to go to the office if the work is mainly digital? And the main reply, if you can go to the next, is really simple, is to meet people, to fostering communication. Because something that we discovered during the pandemic is that during the pandemic, actually, with all the calls, with all the remote working, we were reinforcing our strong ties, but we were totally canceling our weak ties. Links, connection that following Mark Granovetter, for example, are keys for innovation. This is something we touch with our hand during pandemic. And if we can go to the next, there's another aspect that is also important and that we touch with our hand during the pandemic. That is the importance of green and open air activities. That is a really important aspect that we're trying to embed in our architectural and urban design project here at CRA. Next one, thanks. Well, starting from well, I wanted only to mention this main example of change that were already in process and that we touched by hand during the pandemic. And I would like to close with the next slide with one last example of how even an event as the pandemic could become an opportunity of innovation and experimentation of new solutions. And is an example that is really far from the urban studies, but I think it can be interesting to be discussed today. Next slide. Well, this is the Lavazza Cafe in London that we just opened some months ago. Well, is a normal bar, but after the first lockdown in Italy, Lavazza came to us asking to revise the counter, proposing some ideas to create something, let's say, COVID-proof. Well, next slide, not that easy. What came to our mind, it has been to work with the counter shape and with a lighting system able to sanitize periodically the countertop. We did several tests, experimentation together with Harvard professor Edward Nardell, an expert in UVC system. And here you can see some visualization of one of the tests we did. Well, it's a really small project. It's also not so close to the topics today, but I think is interesting to understand how even disruptive event as the pandemic can help in the urban innovation and in the acceleration of a certain process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and Andrea. Really fascinating to hear from you in the sort of perspective of what you're seeing. To close our panel of speaking, before we move on to then the panel discussion and the Q&A, Yosuke, could you please start your slides and give us your thoughts, please, on what you're seeing and how you think things are going to evolve?
Okay. Can you see the screen? Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. So for me, what this pandemic brought to us was kind of rethinking of the distance with the people, also like a mobility in the city, also like sharing the space with the people. I think that was really challenging for us architects. Also, we understood it was so important the issue for the city, also for the architecture, for the urban space. But I think like this challenging for us, it's gonna bring to the future, which has new kind of urban space, which we never imagined before. For example, this is the roof terrace kindergarten, kids running around at the top of the unité d'habitation designed by the Corbusier, which nobody imagined before. But like using this social change, some architects created kind of new vision for the future. I think if you look back the current from the future, like 50 years later, I think we are the kind of beginning of like seeking the new shape of the city of the future. So a little bit introducing about our office, MAD Architect. We are based in Beijing, capital of China. We have three partners. My answer and Danjun, they are Chinese, but I'm Japanese. So we have three offices in globally. So we have a headquarters in Beijing with 120 people, but we have another office in LA, States, also in Rome, in Italy. So we are basically operating three different offices in three different locations. That brought us to understand what this pandemic made in different locations, different countries, different culture. Then we have to learn, we have to respond spontaneously. So, for example, this is a project in Canada. We finished a long time ago. So this is another project we finished in China, in Harbin Opera House. Also, this is another art installation in Japan. So we're doing globally, also we're doing different scale of project, human scale, architecture scale, and urban scale. So I think that gives us quite a lot of experience from this pandemic. So because myself as well, I went back to Japan last year for Chinese New Year. I couldn't come back to China because China closed the border. So I stuck in Japan for 10 months. Then came back here last year around this time. And that gave me lots of lessons to see different country, different policy has different social feedback. So for example, China having zero COVID policy, but Japan is more about how to coexist with COVID. So I want to briefly introduce how was situation trajectory in China. So basically in China, everybody has to install the app in their mobile phone. Then wherever they go, you have to scan the health code to let in. So this gonna go back to the overall the system, which gonna immediately to tell you which has the high risk, middle risk, or where you can go. So also this gonna happen by both digital way, also very physical way. So this is a very particular response. in this country. So it's happened day and night. So also this, by having this situation with the mobile consuming become really popular, then lots of people buying things online, then people deliver from point to point. And that makes this kind of a controlling system possible. Because in China, to lock down local area, it's much easier to control instead of having people moving around. So contrastly, in Japan, it's more about, we have system to install to your mobile, but it's not mandatory. So that's why not so many people actually using this, but it's more about the bottom up. So how people by themselves to respond to having social distance, so on and so on. Also how to keep the balance between working and having distance. Also, some of the response as the new type of working system was quite interesting for me. For example, this platform, they bind the empty house, like a vacant house in suburbia, they put together. So actually people can travel, then stay in this house to work for a few days. Then after that, they can move to another city to stay in this the kind of the house, another house for a few days. But at the same time, this company introduced this local community for the visitor to be part of this local community, so they can understand the culture or the neighborhood. I think this is how you can expand the understanding of the city horizontally. Also, another response was like having a small truck, but having a small office space inside. So wherever you want to go, you can go, you stay and work together. Also, this was how to divide the hotel room into small units, then rent by hours. So how to make stock in the city to be in different platform. I think it was interesting to see the both different response from different countries. So this is from what we learned. I think it's quite important to think about what is the future. Can be another, again, to be the place for the people. We have to think about this concentration, how to control, but this should happen in different scale. So whenever we design, whenever we approach the city, we have to control what we have to think about. The concentration of the human scale or architecture scale, also urban scale. So I think that before pandemic, it was like efficiency was kind of powerful parameter for city, for architecture to control the design direction. But now we have some other kind of criteria which go beyond the efficiency, which makes us to think about city in different way. So for example, human scale, if the central core for the high-rise building was like all about efficiency, but now we have different way to think about it. Then we have another way to think about city center, but the city center doesn't have kind of physical center, but more spread out horizontally. So that's why I think the future of the city is more about with multi-central inside. Also, like it's sometimes become like a more network. Then as whole, it's work like a human body. It's like work as more flexible way, then work as kind of organic system. I think that's gonna give us like a new kind of joy to come back to city, but to imagine about what kind of a new urban life we're gonna have in the city in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yasuke, and thank you once again to Deborah and Andrea as well for your different perspectives. I think what's really fascinating about hearing all of you speak is the perspectives and the experiences are so different and also so personal depending on the country or the area of the world that you're in. But also there were some really recurring themes. And one I'd like to pick up on, Andrea, you mentioned the importance of greenery and exterior space. Already we've seen a trajectory towards valuing exterior space more in our office buildings and around our office buildings. And that's certainly something we've all grown to love, particularly working from home, where we've potentially got better access to exterior space. Deborah, from your perspective as a developer and someone who's ultimately in charge of land acquisition and new urban opportunities, This was something that was happening already. Has COVID accelerated that for you, and particularly with the sustainability aspects that you spoke about in your opening statement?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think now, every master plan that we are looking at, when people sort of talked about kind of public realm, and maybe it was sketched out as a small square somewhere and some trees, whatever, again, it's now really sort of at the forefront of thinking, and it's more about, it's going further than just saying let's have some nice landscaping around residential blocks. I think maybe one of the slides that Yasuki put up, it was quite interesting. Actually, sorry, it was Andrea. We've been looking at, we have one site up in North London that's effectively, a big part of it is turning a car park into a green park with housing. And we've been looking at this whole chain of healthy well-being, access to good, cheap, healthy food. Can you also sort of go back to linking things like ideas about allotments, the whole, biophilia, etc. So trying to sort of take our thinking beyond, let's put in a park with some swings for kids, and thinking about how can we properly mesh together community use, maybe a bit of education, and bringing in this of health and well-being in lots of different meaningful ways. So I think it's really fascinating. Personally, I love gardening, and I think that this idea about bringing more green into our urban environments is brilliant.
And Yasuki, maybe if you could build on that. I mean, you're from Japan. You work in China, but both China and Japan have some very densely populated, very large urban cities. How have you seen in Eastern Asia action to COVID? I mean, obviously very, very strict approaches to lockdown and to controlling movement at the height of the pandemic. Has it fostered a rediscovery of green spaces within urban areas, and has it fostered a sort of a love of that and a desire for that within communities?
I think before we didn't have any other kind of guideline to approach to the city except like a GFA, the density, like a square meter. It was like coming from more economical kind of desire to the city, how city can create more space, more money, more people. But I think that's a certain point, we came to the point we have to little bit think about how city can be the place for the city again, for the city can be the place for the people again, for the community, how we can create another way of living in the city, but again in the city. I think that otherwise I feel a little bit dangerous, because I feel a little bit the trend is coming back to the normal. Of course, after pandemic, we learn how to control or how to close the city in different way, but it's more about it's bring to the different space of the density, densifying the city or different way. But I think that's why I think like having this kind of discussion to think about how the future of the city can be more comfortable or can be the more pleasant space, the place for the people, to at the same time to having kind of control to balance this density, the greenery, the human space, like a human scale, like a belonging for the community. I think that was kind of all discussion like which we have done in last 20, 30 years. But I think now we all different principles, like the profession come to the same point to discuss about things. Like I think otherwise we're gonna lose. I think like Andrea was saying, like the death of the city. I think the city is finished or not. Of course, we don't want to. We know like how city is attract people, but like we have to think about how to sustain it. I think that's what we learn from this pandemic. So that's why I think that's why we in Asia, of course, in China, Japan, it's different, but we're still in the very high dense city in the world. So that's why we are very crucial point to have kind of vision for the future. How we can go beyond this pandemic, how we can go beyond the city of 20th century, how we can create kind of new place for the people. I think that's why I think that's that's why we start at some point we start seeing kind of clue how to approach architecture or city in different way, which we never imagined before. But I think that's why we can combine this kind of different idea together to from different side, we as an architect, like a more politician or like a developer all together. I think that's quite important to think about.
And Yosuke, you showed us some lovely examples of, you know, the mobile office, the sort of the drop-in working home, sort of a sort of organic sort of co-working sort of approach, which I loved, and some older ideas as well, like the unité d'habitation, the nursery on the roof. And there you spoke about this extra layer on top of cities, which is this digital layer. And Yosuke had a similar comparison between the urban map and the map of the human organism and the nervous system, and some of the sort of relationships from the sort of the micro and the macro. What have you seen as examples of that extra digital layer as a piece of city infrastructure? Is there anything that you're maybe looking at with MIT that we might be interested in? How do you see that working in sort of practical terms, and potentially how do you see it tying in with some of Yosuke's examples of, you know, fully digitally connected to control something like a pandemic?
Yeah, this is more on the MIT side actually, because it's more related to Carl's research at Sensible C Lab, where I did my thesis when I was a student. So, for example, when I was there, we were working on a bicycle, on a wheel of a bicycle, what we call the Copenhagen wheel, that was able to transform every bike in an electric bike, and was also able to scan the city with all sensors. So basically, every cyclist became a sort of how to say, high-tech flaneur, to talk about Benjamin. So that's why I was really interested in the example of the city as a human body, as a human organism, and I think this is really interesting. I want to link my reply to what you were saying about the green in the city, because I think it's really linked to the technology and how to embed architecture and technology together. Here, well, we think that embedding technology and architecture, we can consider the architecture in a way as a device to rule our natural relationship, the relation of each user with his environment. And this is a bit more than doing greenwash, that's adding green to in a random way to houses and to architecture, but it's more to go towards what we call maybe a multi-species design. So trying to embed in our environment, different environments able to welcome different species. That's why we're working a lot with botanists, for example, when we're doing projects as the one I show you, because to think about the architecture as a device able to rule this relationship, it needs to go a bit further. And I think what's interesting right now is that at the beginning we were thinking about two layers, as you mentioned, the digital layer and the physical layer. Now the two layers are really merging together, are really linked, and are allowing us to move further and to do other experimentation, for example, with green, as I mentioned.
Yeah, and is Andrea, there's the expression that the sensible city, which of course is your practices lab at MIT, is the sensible city then also the changeable city? Is it? And Richard Rogers used to speak about this in one of his early lectures. Is the ability of a city to flex like a body to its inhabitants and to its needs? Is that something that you think is in the future? And maybe after your response, maybe Yosuke can also jump in from an architectural perspective as well to support yours and give us his thoughts.
Change is the starting point of a city. I think. I mean, it's not related to technology. Cities are replying to user needs, to citizen needs, and the Parisian example I think was a good example. Now during the pandemic, they changed road, putting bike lanes, temporary, then are becoming permanent. So I think, of course, a sensible city is also a changeable city. yeah, of course.
And Yosuke, how does that manifest itself in the build? I mean, architecture is inherently quite static. And I know there are technologies that are evolving that. How can we create architecture and urban environments that become very adaptable and very changeable?
I think I'm a little bit negative about these issues. I think architecture is not so flexible. I think because, like, for example, we design like a train station. Like if we have like 100 people, then if we have like 1,000 people, the immediate need of the air is quite crucial. So lots of MEP, lots of technology behind architecture is like a design for kind of unflexible way. I think that's why I think that architecture is not flexible, but I think people are more flexible, or people is more organic, I think. So that's why the system can control. That's why like how this like top-down system like control people, how many people going in, like in China. I think it's not the way, but I think like people can be more organic way to respond to the situation, to use architecture in different as like a more different perspective. I think this is more kind of direction I am a little bit want to think about how architecture can be more kind of a fluid organization, which can be used in different way by the people responding to the situation.
And Deborah, from a developers and urban planners perspective, how do you react to the idea of a city in evolution? And we'll come on to the concept of city in evolution with one of the questions in a second. But the idea that the asset and the master plan is inherently either changeable in its own right or changeable in the way that, as Yosuke said, that people use it. What's the sweet spot? What's the magic formula from your perspective? You know, bearing in mind a sort of asset value and sort of long-term sort of economic sustainability as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think, you know, if you're master planning and you think that you can set out all the detail for a scheme over 10 years, then you're never going to achieve that. And so flexibility and sort of keeping connected with what does modern living mean? What do modern mixed-use urban neighborhoods need to deliver? I think you've got to have flex, but it's a challenge because, you know, from a developer's perspective, the numbers have got to work. And so I think increasingly what we're seeing is that you need to work really in partnership with local authorities and with planners. There's no point in battling against each other, but with the recognition that whilst the first phase you could be detailed and fix in, you need to do that for profitability and just for clarity of direction to the community. There really has to be more recognition that what that outline consent for that master plan might be today, it's pretty likely that those later phases are going to change and evolve, and what you deliver in 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years time that was outlaid in the master plan today, I suspect in many cases will have flexed. And that's right, that, you know, if you're designing intelligently, building in flexibility that can deliver profit, obviously, but also deliver, you know, truly sustainable and interesting places to live and work is pretty critical.
Thank you. And there was one of the questions which I think has been answered in sort of terms of the response you've given is from Fiona of the University of Aberdeen, is asking whether where we are now is enabling us to move towards the vision expressed by Patrick Geddes in his Cities in Evolution. So the Scottish polymath thinker, scientist, geographer, and the idea that cities evolve not only sort of organically, but also the idea that can be planned, that can be a planned process. I'm going to put my co-host on the spot, and Keith, I'd like to invite you to ask a question of one of our panelists. And you know, obviously you're an architect and a designer and an urbanist. What's chimed with you in terms of what our panelists have spoken to us today, and what are you seeing from the perspective of how cities are evolving, partly as a reaction of COVID and partly in the way that that's accelerated those evolutions?
First of all, congratulations on running a webinar from a hotel foyer on your mobile phone. it's a true miracle. And in case you're wondering why there's this face here, it's just in case his connection failed, and I'm here to step in if his bit of the screen suddenly went blank. But I thought that was fascinating, and what I think I got from that is highlighting just what a pivotal moment we're in. If cities were, as we know them, largely the result of the industrial revolution in their current form, we seem to be going through 3 revolutions at once, with the digital issues which Andrea was talking about, the COVID issues, and the whole sort of societal structure, and everybody's asking questions about everything. So that I don't think the city is going to go anywhere, but I think how we use them is going to change radically, and value will emerge from the agility and the imagination applied to those reuses. Everything needs almost redesigning: the home, where we work, education, how we look after old people. All of those things are in flux at the moment, and it's a great time to be a designer and doing that sort of thing. You sort of feel useful for once in your life, rather than just deciding what something looks like. So I think they've touched on all the subjects. I was particularly taken by Yosuke's mobile life that's emerging around things in Japan and China. And I'm sure we've all got a version of it here. And I know on the green front, on a really mundane level, my wife has been trying to get our back garden leveled for a year by some heavy-duty landscape people, because it's on quite a steep hill, and she just has always wanted a level garden. There's a year's waiting list to get people to come and look at gardens in London, and if that isn't the market telling you very clearly that something very different is happening, I don't know what is. It's a stupid point, but there you go. I thought that was wonderful, and congratulations on doing all this from your phone.
Well, we've all spoken about modern technology, and this is one of the miracles. But I think the audience is being a little shy with the questions. So I'm going to ask Andrea another point. When we spoke on Friday about this event and what you were going to say, something we talked about is how different functions in urban centres are evolving. I think we spoke about, the idea of the business part, sort of dying really, and people coming back into urban centres and uses sort of mixing. What's your view on creating, and we're sort of segueing off COVID a little bit, but we're still very much on cities. What's your view of mixing uses and functions within spaces? How can that be engineered, or to what extent does it happen naturally?
It's something that is a process, again, that already started with the so-called digital revolution of people moving again to the center of the cities, the overlap of functions, so more similar to a Jane Jacobs landscape than a Le Corbusier one, probably, where everything was divided. So this, to me, is really interesting. It is really, well, you're an example today, on how we can merge functions together, and everyone here around the table touch with hands what it means to do remote work, to work from home, what is good, what is not. I mentioned something that we're really interested in this day here in the office, that are the strong ties and the weak ties. Because sometimes working from home well, it's difficult because you are really reinforcing the strong ties, but you're really canceling on the weak ties that are the most important probably in our life, in business and innovation. No, and sometimes you also forget that the world is not frictionless. That friction are normally in the urban landscape, and you have to understand how to figure out with friction and with, well, we can see it in Italy, for example, with all the Novax manifestation, Novax problem. But I think it's also linked to what we were discussing with Yosuke. I wanted to mention that when I said that of course, also the sensible city is also changeable city. I didn't really mention the flexibility, but I wanted to mention the evolution, the changes, no? Also in an unplanned way, as in the Parisian example, and maybe in a bottom-up way. There's a quote that I really like from Le Corbusier that we mentioned several times today, that was about Chandigarh, no? About how people lived in Chandigarh. When he saw how the architecture was changing by people in a sort of bottom-up way, he replied, in French, c'est toujours la vie qui a raison, l'architecture qui a tort. It's always life that is right and architecture is wrong. And this, I think, is really important to keep in mind.
Yeah, and Deborah, we spoke in our preview a little bit about what that means, and I think the words like gentrification and urban improvement and placemaking can have a dual, can sometimes be used as dirty words, and sometimes it's there's a perception that maybe big projects, big urban sort of interventions actually take the life and the genuine sort of humanity out of cities, and I know that's something that's front of center of all sort of informed and sensitive developers at the moment. What does that mean in your interpretation, and perhaps give us some examples of how you're looking at maintaining that genuine life DNA of a place with the need for urban improvement and
really difficult one. I'm sorry, could somebody else answer this? I have to go and answer my door because I've got somebody really bashing on it at the moment. I'm really sorry.
No problem at all. I was going to invite Yosuke into the question as well, but I think Andrea's got his hand raised. Did you want to add something?
That's the remote working.
Yeah. So Yosuke, so Andrea quoted Le Corbusier, la vie a raison, l'architecture a tort. So life is right, architecture is wrong. Where does architecture make an intervention that not only creates a positive catalyst for improvement, but also respects the natural ebb and flow of a place?
I think hearing this discussion about the flexibility or organic response of the city, but I think architecture is not so organic, but the city is very organic, because I realize, because now you're living in Paris, which hundreds of years ago people living in the same Paris, but in different way. The London as well, like Rome as well. The city center of Rome in Roman age has different meaning or different quality of space. But we keep lots of different architects, lots of people participating in this history, then response, then creating kind of layer to create current, find our top of the layer. But I think we are again putting one more layer to find different the participation of the city. So that's why I think the architecture is not so flexible, but as a cluster of architecture become kind of a city fabric. Also, because city has people who is more organic to respond to the situation. I think that's going to push the city to be more like a different form for the future. I think that's kind of this. The key is how the designer, the architect, also urban planner can share this kind of approach to think the future from a different aspect. I think that's a very the key lesson we learned from this pandemic.
Yeah, thank you, Yosuke. And I mean, Andrea earlier mentioned Jane Jacobs, and the themes around sort of civic engagement and advancing cities in a way that's organic and natural and responds to the inhabitants. So back to you, Deborah, if you managed to collect your parcel, if I may. From a developer's perspective, how can developers not be the the big bad people who disrespect the natural sort of community? How can developers enhance community? I know it's happening, but how does it happen consciously?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what I was sort of saying right at the beginning, that although people talk about placemaking, I've heard people talk about placekeeping, and I'm truly connecting with communities, and that's not just for the planning consultation piece. That is really building on the ground and continuing it through. I think what I've seen at Landsec is that through all of our developments, we do a lot of small scale on the ground community work. So it's not maybe the kind of big flashy names that people would necessarily recognize. But what that's enabled in these developments is to start to sort of form a little organic network of people who are truly tapped in, I would say, to local communities. I mean, Lewisham is a great example of this, a very vibrant, buzzing, lot of young people there, but not maybe so much opportunity as there are in some other boroughs in London. And we've been at that shopping centre now for many years. And so we've built up a great network of local organisations who do kind of listen to what the young people in the area are kind of interested in, wanting to do, try to create job training opportunities. And in our placemaking, at the absolute heart of it, we are wanting to support more of these, to use in a good way them to hear the kind of voice of the community, and particularly young people, because they're the ones that are it's going to impact them most throughout their lives in this area, and to try and incorporate what's coming out of that into the scheme, but also back to sort of one of our core points about realizing potential, truly try and sort of create some economic opportunities in some of these areas, so that we talk about urban areas and cities, but then London is split up into lots of different urban neighborhoods already, and in places like Lewisham, we want to make sure that anything we do supports and creates economic activity, rather than becoming a kind of a dormitory, very high-end residential area that people sleep in but don't engage with. So it's a slightly long answer, I'm afraid, but that's kind of
really helpful, Deborah. And I'd just like to end with one more question. Actually, I'm going to throw it back to Keith. There's one of Fletcher Priest's building that's been very applauded, is the building in Paddington, the Brunel building, where there are big doors on the ground floor that sort of break down the barrier between the internal and the external, so that the lobby almost becomes an extension of the street. Do you see that as being a future, a much more blurred line between public and private space, as a way of re-engaging inhabitants with the city, but also with the buildings?
Yeah, those doors are aircraft hangar doors. They're a couple of stories high, and we thought they would be open in the summer months and be a facility, but they're operated by the people in charge of reception, so they decide whether they're open or not. And they're open much more than we ever thought. And all the issues that we talked about, as far as I'm aware, as being potential problems, haven't happened. People understand that they're coming into a building and they understand what is truly public space, but the public does come into it. The thing I caution, though, is there's a beautiful canal with canal boats in front of it as well, and that's not the case for every street. I think there is a case for making great streets, and in a way it's already on a great street. It was just hidden in plain sight. So yes, I think there is lots of people are taking away that barrier between the public and semi-public spaces of buildings, and I think they're all the better for it. And they seem to thrive, but we're just feeling our way through all of these approaches to integrating with street life, really. There's a lot of things to overcome, and a lot of cultural differences country to country. and we often benefit from having, we're doing one particular project at the moment where the client's perspective is Asian in a London context, and they're not worried about all sorts of things to do with multi-level entrances and things like that, because to them, they manage it every day of their lives in their hometowns. And that's an interesting change, having this sort of cultural meeting point at the briefing level, which is helpful, I think, and produces all sorts of interesting outcomes.
Fantastic. Thank you, Keith. And if we bring a very British aspect into this, we'll hopefully build some of your allotments around and inside our buildings, which will make Deborah very, very happy, and me too. Perhaps the sort of the kitchen could have fresh vegetables from the local garden. So on that note, I want to give everyone 3 minutes back in their diary to take a break and grab a cup of tea before your potential 1 o'clock meeting. But thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great thank you once again to our panel. So Andrea, Yosuke, and Deborah, and our guest panelists / host Keith, and of course the BCO for hosting the event. Have a great afternoon or evening wherever you are, and the recording will be available on the BCO website in case you missed some of this, or in case you want to share it with colleagues and friends. For now, from me, from Riyadh, thank you very much, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.